Hi, my name is David Schindler. I'm with the City of Cheyenne's Forestry Division. Today we're going to be demonstrating how to properly plant a ball and burlap tree. Before we get going though, I think we need to discuss just a few things that we need to do before we actually plant the tree. And the first thing is we need to determine what type of a tree we want. What do we want this tree to do for our landscape? Do we have enough room for this tree? How big is this tree going to get when it reaches its mature size, both in height and in spread? Once we've kind of figured out how much room this tree is going to take up when it's at its mature age, then we can go ahead and figure out exactly where we want to place the tree. Then what you need to do is you need to call for locates. There may be underground gas lines, communication lines, water, sewer, so that needs to get checked out as well. So before you even, dig the hole, make sure you call in for locates. So you've called in for locates, you've figured out what type of tree you want, and you know how big it's going to get, how wide it's going to get. Then also another thing to think about is this tree, going to be blocking visibility, or do you want it to screen something out? Those are other things you kind of want to take into consideration as well. So when you have all those things figured out, you've purchased your tree. The other thing, when you go to buy your tree, you want to make sure that you have a nice trunk with good taper from the base all the way to the tip. You want to make sure it has good branch attachment to the trunk. You don't have codominant stems, things like that. All right. Well, the first thing that we're going to do, we already have this hole prepared. It's a little bit too deep. You want to make sure that the hole isn't too deep. Typically, you want the hole no deeper than about right here on your root ball. So right now we dug these with the backhoe. Like I say, you don't want it too deep, but you can't hurt to dig it too wide. And a general rule of thumb is that you want the planting hole to be approximately 3 times the diameter of this root ball. So anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom part of this wire basket. So just using a pair of bolt cutters, I'm going to remove this bottom part of the basket. Then I'm going to take my utility knife and cut the bottom of the burlap off. Okay, let's roll this a little bit closer to the hole. I'm going to go ahead and just cut the remainder of this wire basket. And the remainder of the burlap. All right, now I'm going to fill this hole in a little bit because it appears to be too deep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my shovel. I'm just going to measure. Let's treat a little bit this way so you can get a good angle. I'm just going to measure from the bottom of the root ball up to the shoulder of the root ball. Mark it. We're a little bit too deep. You never want the trees planted too deep. If you're going to err, it's better to have them a little high, approximately 2 inches or so above grade. So it's better to have them a little high than too deep. going to measure it again. That's looking pretty good. A lot of times, especially bow and burlap trees, when they come from the nursery, they're already too deep inside this root ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel this away a little bit, just to find out where that transition between trunk and root is, because I want that to be above grade. I'm just going to dig in here a little bit, see where that's at. Looks like there's a little bit of soil built up. So again, if you're going to air, it's better to have it too high. So I think we're pretty close. Let me double check it. When we go to roll this into the hole, we may lose the bottom of the root ball, and that's all right. You want to try to keep the root ball intact as much as you can, but it's better for all this to be removed, and that will allow the roots to grow out into this soil much easier without this impeding the roots. So with that, we're going to go ahead and roll this into the hole. Ready? Now what we're going to do is just position this in the middle of our hole, about like so. And here it looks like it's quite a bit too high, but in all reality it's not, because when I added that dirt to the bottom of the hole, that dirt is going to settle when we water this tree in, so this tree is going to sink a little bit. So right now it may appear that it's a little bit too high, but really it's not. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of the wire basket and the burlap. Get all the twine that's around the trunk. If there's any twine that's left around the trunk, that'll end up girdling the tree. So it's crucial that all that twine gets removed. Got one more there? Okay. All right, got the tree where it's supposed to be. It's best to use the same dirt to backfill around the root ball. At the time of planting, you really, if you're going to amend the soil, you need to amend a huge area. Like right now, it wouldn't do much good for us just to throw some peat or something in here, or compost. We don't want to create what's called an interface. We want this dirt that goes back around the root ball to be pretty similar to what's right here. If we are gonna add compost in that, we would want to be adding it to this whole area way out here. So if you're going to amend, don't just throw a little bit right in by the dirt ball, but try to, incorporate that clear out into here. And the same dirt that you dug out of the hole, that's what goes back in. So, and typically, if you have a bunch of like dirt such as we have here where there's big clumps, when you're digging your hole and if you see that it's real clumpy like this, if you have a rotor tiller, that'd be sweet to try to break up some of these clumps. What we're going to do is we're just going to put the dirt back in, and we're going to make sure we don't have any big clumps like right up against here. So if we do have some clumps, we're going to use our shovel and just break those up. We're going to put a little bit of dirt around the bottom of the root ball here. And this root ball stayed together fairly well. If you have a root ball that falls apart, you know, it's not ideal, but it does happen sometimes. It's still better to get all the wire and the burlap off and have the ball, you know, fall apart a little bit than to leave it on. So this one held together really well, and that's good. Okay, we've got dirt around the root ball, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the tree is straight. And we're going to do that by just backing up at a 90-degree angle from each. We'll back up this way and look at it to make sure it's straight this way, and then we'll back up this way to make sure it's straight this way. It has to go back that way. Okay, go ahead and maybe just a little bit more. That looks pretty good. How does it look your way?
Good.
Pretty straight. This one here, it has a bow to it. Then you just have to kind of estimate it just so it's relatively straight. It can be kind of difficult. It has weird bows to it, but just overall, I guess, you know, just kind of take a look at the entire crown of the tree and get it as straight as you can. So we're going to go ahead and finish backfilling. And again, we want to use our shovels and kind of break up some of these big clumps. All right, if this were in your yard, right about, you'd have a garden hose handy, and you'd want to go ahead and water in this dirt here, just get it so it'll settle around the root ball. We don't have that luxury of having the garden hose right handy, so we're just going to go ahead, we're going to add more dirt, and at the end we'll make a ring and we'll water it in, and that will get all this dirt to settle around the root ball. So we're going to go ahead and just keep adding dirt. We've got some big pieces of sod here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to use these clumps of sod as part of our well. With the wind blowing and us putting the dirt around it, the tree may have shifted a little bit. So I'm going to take another look at it just to make sure it's straight. Yeah, this one's a tough tree. It has just a weird bend to it, but it looks good. If we needed to straighten this tree at all, you know, it's okay to move it a little bit and then just step lightly to kind of firm it to get it to stay in the position where you need it. But really, you don't want to be stamping this down a whole lot. The water is going to go ahead and get this dirt to settle. Okay, before we started, I was trying to find that transition area between trunk and root. Some people call it the trunk flare, others call it a root flare. Basically, it's where you have the transition between root and trunk, and that's what you want to be above grade. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my shovel and just carefully remove this excess dirt and really try to find that area. I found it a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of this dirt. It's a lot of times in the process of these trees being grown, dirt is, well, they're cultivating by the trees, and then when they go to ball and burlap them, a lot of times they do end up being too deep inside the root ball. So I'm going to go ahead and shave a little bit of this off, being careful not to hit the trunk. And a lot of times when you have where the dirt is getting piled up on the trunk, you'll have girdling roots start. So if you see any girdling roots at this point, go ahead and cut them. Because a girdling root around here would be the same as if we were to have left the string around there. It'll end up girdling the tree as the tree grows. So really look for girdling roots right here at the base. Okay, here I'm starting to see this transition between the trunk and the roots. As you can see, this one was approximately, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 inches deep inside the root ball, so not too bad. We've seen them as deep as 6 to 8 inches, so this one wasn't too bad. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to water the tree in, and we're just going to water it and try and get some of this dirt around the root ball, get that to settle in. So we're going to have to get our water truck over here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start watering this in. When a tree is first planted, you really need to give it a good thorough watering. You can see here how the dirt that we filled back in around the root ball, you can see how it's settling around the root ball. So we really want to give it a thorough watering when we initially plant the tree, just to settle this dirt around the root ball. So I'm going to go ahead and just water it a little bit more here. Yeah, you can see how the dirt is settling, and that's getting all those air pockets out of there. If this tree were in your front yard and it's irrigated, it's going to be getting plenty of water with the irrigation system that's you have for your lawn. You don't really have to have this well. If it's in an area that's not irrigated, it is nice to have this well just to get ample water for this tree, at least for the first 3 to 5 years until it gets established. It's going to need a little extra water. Here you can see where the backfilled dirt, how it has settled around the root ball. We're going to go ahead and use some of this dirt here to just sort of fill this in. So we're going to do that at this time. You want to cover up any exposed roots like these ones here. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure I get dirt on any of these exposed roots. Not a lot though. All right, got the tree watered in. It's still fairly straight. I'm going to take one last look at it, make sure that it didn't shift during the watering process. And it's still pretty straight. It's got a little bow to it, but again, that's fine. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and stake this tree. And the first thing I like to do is to put my first stake on the northwest side of the tree, because that's where we have the prevailing winds from. So that would be right about where this one is here. Why we need to stake these trees is just the winds in Cheyenne are such that we've tried to not stake. If you have smaller trees, you can get away with it. But anytime you get into bigger diameter trees, and especially even smaller evergreens, you pretty much need to stake just because of the winds. It'll move it. And there just aren't enough roots to hold that tree in position. So that's the main reason why we're going to stake this, is just to keep it from moving. Well, first we'll go ahead and get the T-posts in, and we're going to use wire to secure the tree to the stakes, and then we're going to use straps with grommets in them. You don't want to just put wire clear around the trunk. You want to make sure you have a strap, and the reason for that being is the strap spreads out the pull, if you will, on the trunk. Typically on a tree this size, you could possibly go with 2. However, if we get a strong wind either this way or this way, it's going to want to shift it. So a tree this size, you'd want 3 T-posts on it. However, we're at the Arboretum here, there's deer, and we're going to put fencing around these trees, so we're going to do 4. We're only going to stake it in 3 spots, but we're going to have 4 T-posts around this. Getting back to staking again, if this were a small tree, we possibly could get by with maybe just 1 stake on the prevailing wind side or the northwest side of the tree. Again, this tree is considerably bigger. It's going to be catching a lot of wind once these leaves emerge. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put 3 straps onto this tree. And I'm using just regular baling wire. If you have string, that would work fine. The main thing is you do not want to just put wire around the trunk like this. You do not want to do that. You want to use a strap. And again, that's going to just spread this pull around a bigger diameter of the trunk. You do not want your tree staked extremely rigidly. You want the tree to be able to move a little bit. And the reason for that is that's going to build up what's called reaction wood in the trunk. So you don't want this thing staked so tightly that it can't move. You want there to be some movement in there. And it just sort of depends on the height of the tree as to where these are going to be. But on a tree this size, this is typically where you'd want to place your straps. You don't want them too high. If you place them too low, the tree is still going to move. So we found that at this height, this works out quite well. All right, I've got it staked 3 ways. As you can see, the tree still can move a little bit. You can see the wires flexing. That's fine. I should have pointed this out when we first started, but you want your T-post just outside of your well if you end up having a well. And the reason for that is if we were to have put these right here, where we water all the time, the ground would be too wet and these T-posts would want to move. So, and the other reason why we're keeping them back a ways is, again, we're going to put fencing around this tree so the deer can't rub on it and start eating the buds and stuff. So. All right, we've got the tree watered, staked. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mulch it in. And typically you want a mulch that's a mixture of wood and like leaf material. Any kind of mulch is probably better than none, but ideally you'd want a wood type mulch with the bark, leaf material, stuff like that. That's ideal. If you're concerned about wind, you know, blowing it, you could go with a rock mulch. We have tons and tons of the regular mulch as you see in the truck here, so we're just going to use the regular wood mulch, and we're going to mulch it in. We're going to mulch it into 2 to 4 inches deep, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just level this mulch. You do not want to, what we call, volcano your mulch up around the trunk. You want the mulch away from the trunk. And the purpose of the mulch primarily is to conserve the water in the soil after we water it. So this is really going to conserve that soil moisture. That's the main reason for using the mulch. There's other reasons as well, and those are it'll keep the weeds from growing in as fast. Grass. It's also going to be better if there's no grass growing up next to the trunk. You'll be less likely to get that grass with a lawnmower or a weed eater. So it's going to conserve soil moisture. It's going to keep the weeds and the grass from encroaching on the trunk, and therefore you will not have to be using your weed eater and hitting the trunk of the tree, as we see that all too often where people, you know, they have grass right up to the tree and they keep hitting it with their lawnmowers and their weed eaters, and that's very hard on the tree. So again, mulch about 2 to 4 inches deep, keep it away from the trunk. The other nice thing about this type of a mulch is it will break down. Down the road, we probably will extend this mulch, because this is a dry land area. We'll extend this mulch out another 3 to 4 feet, and this mulch will decompose, and that'll add organic matter back into the soil. So we prefer to use this type of mulch. But again, if you're concerned about the wind or whatever, you could use rock, but again, keep the rock away from the trunk.